However, much of what we've talked about here is moot when the president faces what we call divided government. This means that one party controls the executive branch and the other party controls the legislative branch. When the majority of Congress has one set of preferences and the president has a second, widely different set of preferences, there's little room for negotiation and little room for compromise. Think about something like abortion, right? Republicans have one set of beliefs, Democrats have another set of beliefs. There's no real room for compromise between the two, and you're not going to see much happen on that type of policy when both sets of institutions have power in the process and can check and balance each other. So, what do modern presidents do with an opposition Congress? Well, that's another great question you just asked. They tend to rely more on their constitutional and other unilateral resources. Things like the executive order become more popular and more frequent. We've seen President Trump doing executive orders on things like the Muslim travel ban, on sanctuary cities, etc., etc. Back in the night, we saw President Obama threaten to pass an executive order supporting strict gun control, and basically daring Congress to repeal it or the courts to find them unconstitutional. There's a potential cost here in terms of the president spending political capital, but it would be an interesting change in congressional relations if the president expanded his use of executive orders to include even more significant legislation than he already has. Executive orders are particularly powerful because they retain the force of law unless Congress is able to repeal them, or if the Supreme Court or another court rules them unconstitutional. This can be a long, difficult process, and until recently, the Supreme Court has been unlikely to challenge the president on significant pieces of legislation that he supports, or significant executive orders. As we grow more and more divided, and if we continue to prefer outsiders who run against Washington, D.C. in the White House, we can probably expect to see this type of power increase. The final thing I want to talk about today is the president as a strategic actor. I write all my own lectures and all my own slides, sometimes I borrow the graphics from people, obviously, because I think that's important, and I'm a big believer that it's not really possible to deliver someone else's speech credibly, at least for someone who isn't a trained actor. But I actually copied this text straight from the publisher's website. It was written by some very smart people, and it talks about how the president's success is directly correlated to his maneuverings and skill as a leader. The idea is that if the president makes all the right strategic moves, he'll win and get all of his legislation. The corollary of that is if he fails, it's because he made the wrong strategic moves. A political scientist named Brendan Nyhan calls this the Green Lantern theory of presidential power. I don't know why the Green Lantern, I don't know my superheroes well enough to know if that's a better one than another, but Brendan Nyhan likes the Green Lantern and he did some cool pictures with it, so why not? In this model, though, the president is the Green Lantern, a superhero who can do whatever he wants, and if he doesn't get his way, it's because he's an epic failure, as the youth say. We see that this isn't true, though, especially as Congress begins to assert its power as a co-equal branch in the legislative process, and as the people become more and more cynical toward all branches of government. I'm going to post some supplemental material for this lecture, and I'll post the Vox.com article explaining this theory in more detail, but it's something to think about whenever you hear the media critiques of the president every time he can't move mountains only using his words and his veto pen. Well, that's all I had for today. Tomorrow's a big day, though, coming up with the Supreme Court and the rest of the judicial branch. As a bonus, you'll get to hear me struggle through the words judicial and judiciary probably a couple dozen times in that lecture. For whatever reason, I have a hard time saying it. So with that, thank you all, and life will be good.